I still remember the smell of lavender paint in the nursery. It was supposed to be the scent of new beginnings, soft, gentle, and full of promise. But now, whenever I catch even the faintest whiff of lavender, my stomach twists with something else: betrayal. When I first walked into that empty room, walls bare, carpet torn, crib gone, it felt like the air had been punched out of me. I couldn't even speak. I just stood there, holding my belly, feeling my baby kick for the first time that day, as if she knew something terrible had just happened. That's where my story begins. But to understand what led to that moment, and why my heart broke in a way I never thought possible, I need to take you back to the days when everything still felt perfect. When I found out I was pregnant, I cried, not because I was scared, but because it felt like my life was finally settling into place. My husband, Daniel, and I had been married for 4 years, and though we'd faced our share of struggles, tight finances, tiny apartments, long work hours, we were finally ready. We'd just moved into a modest 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't fancy, but it had a backyard big enough for a garden, and sunlight poured through the windows in the morning. Every time I stood by that window, hand resting on my growing belly, I imagined my baby playing on the rug while I folded laundry, or Daniel reading bedtime stories by the crib. Daniel's mother, Evelyn, lived just 15 minutes away. At first, I was grateful for her help. She came by with homemade soups and little gifts, tiny socks, baby bibs, nursery decorations. She'd been a single mom most of her life, and Daniel was her only child. I understood her closeness. I even admired it. But there were moments when I sensed something else: a sharpness behind her smile, a tension in the air whenever I talked about my own parents helping us financially. Evelyn liked to be the one in control, and when she couldn't be, her warmth cooled quickly. Still, I tried to include her. When we started planning the nursery, she insisted on helping. "You don't worry about a thing," she said one afternoon, smoothing her auburn hair into place. "I've raised a child, remember? I know what a baby needs." I smiled, even though I had my own vision. She spent the next few weeks dropping off little things: a rocking chair she'd found at a thrift store, an old lamp from Daniel's childhood bedroom. Some of it was sweet. Some of it, not so much. The chair creaked so loudly it woke me up at night. The lamp flickered. But I didn't complain. That's the thing about family, especially in-laws. You bite your tongue until it bleeds because peace feels more important than pride. Daniel adored his mother, and I didn't want to be the wife who made him choose. It started with a phone call, one of those quick, half-mumbled ones you overhear but pretend not to. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, when Evelyn stopped by just to see how you're doing. Daniel was still at work. She perched on the edge of the counter stool, talking fast, nervous. When her phone rang, she answered immediately. Her tone dropped to a whisper. "No, I told you I'd have it this week. I just need to move some things around. You'll get it. You'll get it, I promise." Then she looked at me, startled, guilty, and said quickly, "I've got to go, I'm at my son's place," before hanging up. I tried not to think much of it. Maybe it was just a bill collector, or some private matter. But when she left, I noticed her hands were trembling. Later that week, Daniel mentioned something odd. "Mom asked if we're still using that online baby registry," he said, scrolling through his phone. "She wanted to know if we already bought the crib or if she could, handle it herself." I laughed. "She already bought the crib last month. Remember? The one she said was her big gift?" Daniel frowned. "Right, she did." We both shrugged it off. But little things kept happening. Packages that were supposed to arrive never did. A stroller we ordered on sale got mysteriously returned even though we never received it. And Evelyn started visiting less often, something she never did before. I chalked it up to nerves. Everyone gets anxious before a baby arrives, I told myself. Maybe she just needed space. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. It was early spring, just 3 weeks before my due date. Daniel had gone on a short work trip, and I spent the day nesting, washing tiny clothes, folding blankets, humming softly. I remember standing in the nursery, admiring how everything had finally come together. The sunlight hit the curtains just right, painting the room in golden warmth. The crib was set up near the window, the mobile dangling above it, soft pastel stars turning gently in the breeze. For the first time in months, I felt ready. Later that night, Evelyn called. She sounded upbeat. Too upbeat. "Sweetheart, how are you feeling?" "I was just thinking, maybe you should let me clean the nursery tomorrow." "You need to rest." "Don't worry about a thing, I'll take care of it." Something in her tone made me hesitate. Still, exhaustion won. "That would be lovely," I said. "Thank you, Mom." When I woke the next morning, my phone had a text from her. "Don't come into the nursery yet, I'm rearranging everything." I smiled. How sweet, I thought. Maybe she wanted to surprise me. But when I walked in later that afternoon, the room was empty. Every single thing, the crib, the rocking chair, the changing table, even the rug, gone. The curtains fluttered in the wind through the half-open window, and for a moment, I thought maybe I was dreaming. Then I saw the faint scratches on the floor, the mark where the crib had been dragged away. My breath caught in my throat. I dialed Evelyn's number, hands shaking. She picked up on the first ring. "Oh, honey," she said cheerfully, "don't panic. There was a leak from the window. The furniture got water damaged. I took it all to be fixed." Her voice was calm, too calm. Something deep in my chest told me she was lying. I hung up without answering. For the first time, I felt something sharp and cold twist through me, not fear, not sadness, but anger. Because I knew, in that moment, that whatever had happened in that room wasn't an accident. And I was going to find out the truth. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty nursery, the hollow space where the crib used to be, the faint ring on the wall where the clock once hung. It wasn't just furniture. It was months of dreaming, planning, waiting. When Daniel got home the next morning, I tried to keep my voice steady, but it cracked anyway. "Everything's gone, Daniel. The whole nursery. Your mom said there was a leak and she took it to get fixed." He blinked, groggy from travel. "A leak? What leak?" "That's what I said," I snapped, then softened, guilt creeping in. But she sounded calm. Like it was nothing. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Okay. Let me call her." He stepped out to the porch, and I listened through the window, my heart pounding in my throat. His voice started calm, then turned sharp. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "No, I didn't authorize anything." "You did what?" Then silence. And when he walked back in, his expression told me everything. "She sold it," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "All of it. She told me she had a buyer who needed nursery furniture urgently. She said it was for charity, but I think—" I cut him off, my pulse roaring in my ears. "She sold our baby's things?" He nodded slowly. "She said she needed the money." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My knees felt weak, and I had to grab the counter to steady myself. "The money?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "For what?" Daniel hesitated, eyes darting away. "She owes someone. I think it's gambling, Mira. She's been doing it for years. It got bad lately." The room tilted. I sat down slowly, the world spinning around me. Gambling. She'd taken the nursery, the crib, the baby blankets, the rocking chair, to cover her debts. Not for charity. Not for repair. Just to pay the price of her lies. That night, I couldn't look at Daniel. It wasn't his fault, not really, but part of me blamed him anyway. He'd grown up with her patterns. He must have known something. Around midnight, I got up and went to the kitchen for water. My reflection in the window startled me, pale, eyes red, hand resting protectively on my belly. This baby deserved better than secrets and shame. So I did what any mother would do. I decided to find out the truth myself. The next morning, I drove to Evelyn's house. She opened the door in her robe, her hair unbrushed, eyes rimmed with fatigue. "Mira," she said, startled. "Sweetheart, you should be resting." "Where's the furniture, Evelyn?" Her smile faltered. "I told you, it got." "Don't lie to me." My voice came out steady, sharper than I expected. "Daniel told me everything." She froze, eyes darting toward the hallway, a small, nervous habit I'd seen before. "Look," she said softly, "I didn't mean to upset you. I was going to replace it all once I paid things off. I didn't think." "You didn't think?" My voice cracked. "You didn't think selling a baby's crib would matter?" Her eyes filled with tears. "It's not like that, Mira. You don't understand. They were threatening me. I had to pay them back somehow." I stared at her. "You could have asked for help." She shook her head, shame flooding her face. "I didn't want Daniel to know. He already thinks I'm a mess." My anger deflated into disbelief. She wasn't just reckless, she was drowning in her own guilt. But that didn't make what she did right. "Evelyn," I said quietly, "I loved that room. I let you be part of it because I trusted you. And you sold it like it was nothing." She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. "I'll replace it," she whispered. "I'll make it right." I looked around her small living room, cluttered coffee table, stacks of unopened mail, a deck of cards peeking out from under a magazine. The faint smell of cigarette smoke lingered in the air. "You can't buy trust back," I said softly. "And you can't fix this with another promise." I left before she could answer. By the time I reached home, I felt hollow, the kind of emptiness that comes after you stop crying but the pain hasn't left yet. Daniel was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands. "She admitted it?" he asked quietly. "Yes." He sighed, defeated. I should have seen this coming. We sat there in silence. The ticking of the wall clock filled the room, slow and heavy. "Finally," he said, "we'll rebuild it. I'll work overtime, sell the spare car, whatever it takes." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream that no amount of money could undo what she'd done. But when I looked at him, eyes tired, guilt etched deep, I just nodded. "Okay," I whispered. "We'll start over." But starting over wasn't as easy as buying new things. Every time I looked at that empty room, I saw her hands, hands that had once knitted baby socks, now used to sell away our dreams. So I focused on small steps. Daniel canceled Evelyn's spare key. I blocked her number for a week, not out of spite, but because I needed quiet. And I started planning again, slowly, piece by piece. We bought a new crib secondhand. A new rug. My sister helped repaint the walls. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours again. Still, deep down, I knew something had shifted permanently. I couldn't unsee the cracks in the foundation of trust. And Evelyn, she didn't stop trying. She left voicemails, tearful, apologetic. "Please, Mira. Let me explain. I'm getting help. I promise." But forgiveness, I realized, wasn't something you give because someone asks. It's something you give when your heart's ready. And mine wasn't. Not yet. A few weeks later, Evelyn called Daniel. She'd checked herself into a support group for gambling addiction. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Part of me wanted to believe her. Another part of me knew how easily promises broke in her world. I stood in the nursery that night, belly heavy, heart heavier, and whispered to my baby, "You'll never have to wonder if you're safe." Because no matter how long it took, I was going to make sure of that. But just when I thought the worst was behind us, the consequences of Evelyn's choices came knocking again, and this time, they didn't stop at our door. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when the knock came. At first, I thought it was a delivery, maybe the baby monitor I'd ordered finally arrived. But when I opened the door, two men stood on the porch. they weren't delivery drivers. One wore a leather jacket, the other a faded cap. Both looked out of place in our peaceful little neighborhood. "Mrs. Hayes?" the one in the jacket asked. "Yes?" I said, my hand instinctively resting on my belly. "We're looking for Evelyn." "She around?" My stomach tightened. "She doesn't live here." "Yeah, we know. But this is her son's house, right?" He smiled, but it wasn't kind. "We just need to pass a message." Daniel was still at work. The air between us felt heavy, thick. I swallowed hard. "She's not here," I repeated. "And if you have a message, you can tell her directly." The man in the cap stepped forward, his eyes scanning the porch, the stroller box, the baby name decal I'd stuck to the door last week. "Cute setup," he said with a smirk. "You might want to tell her to settle up soon. Interest's piling up." "Interest?" I echoed. "Yeah. Debt's a tricky thing. Someone's gotta pay it." And with that, they turned and walked off, as calm as if they'd just dropped off a package. I closed the door and leaned against it, my hands shaking. They knew where we lived. That night, when Daniel came home, I told him everything. He went pale, then furious. "She promised me it was handled," he said, pacing the living room. "She swore she paid them off." "She didn't," I said quietly. "And now they're coming here." He ran his hands through his hair, eyes darting toward the nursery. "I'll go talk to her." "No," I said, stepping in front of him. "You won't. This isn't something you can talk your way out of." His voice cracked with helplessness. "She's my mom, Mira. I can't just leave her like this." I looked at him, the man I loved, torn between his mother and the family we were building. "I know," I whispered. "But you can't save her if she doesn't want to be saved." Daniel went to see her anyway. He came home late that night, silent. When I asked what happened, he just said, "She's scared. She owes more than she admitted." "How much?" He hesitated. "Enough to lose the house if they wanted to." The baby kicked then, sharp and sudden, like a reminder that life was still moving forward, even as everything else was falling apart. The stress started showing. Daniel wasn't sleeping. I caught him staring at his phone late at night, scrolling through loan options, payday apps, anything. One evening, I found him sitting in the nursery, the lights off, holding one of the tiny shoes we'd bought. "She used to do this when I was a kid," he said quietly. "Borrow money, lie about it, promise it was fixed." I thought, when Dad left, she'd learn. I sat beside him, resting my head on his shoulder. "It's not your fault." He exhaled, long and shaky. "It feels like it is." A few days later, Evelyn called me directly. "Mira," she said softly, voice trembling. "They came to my house again. I think they followed Daniel last time. I don't know what to do." "You go to the police," I said firmly. "I can't. They'll find out everything." "Then you tell Daniel the truth." "All of it." She started crying. "He won't forgive me." "Maybe not now," I said, "but at least he'll know you're trying." There was silence on the other end, then a whisper, "I never meant to hurt you, sweetheart. I just wanted to feel like part of something again." I closed my eyes. For a moment, I saw her not as the woman who'd betrayed me, but as someone lost, desperate for belonging, for forgiveness she didn't know how to ask for. But pity couldn't protect my child. That weekend, Daniel and I packed a few essentials and went to stay at my sister's house across town. It wasn't forever, just until things settled down, as Daniel put it. But the truth was, nothing about this felt temporary. Evelyn's choices had changed everything. 2 weeks later, Evelyn showed up at our doorstep, eyes red, cheeks sunken, a paper envelope clutched in her hand. "I paid them," she said before Daniel could speak. "Every penny." "How?" he asked, suspicion lacing his tone. "I sold the house," she said simply. "It's done." I stared at her, stunned. She looked smaller somehow, fragile. But in her eyes, for the first time, there was clarity. "I can't fix what I've broken," she said softly. "But maybe I can stop breaking more." Daniel said nothing, just nodded, tears brimming. She turned to me then. "I don't expect forgiveness, Mira. I just wanted to make sure you and the baby are safe." Her voice wavered, but she didn't look away. And for the first time I believed her. That night, I lay in bed thinking about everything, the nursery, the fear, the hurt. Forgiveness still felt far away. But healing, maybe that had begun. I whispered to my belly again, "You'll grow up knowing what love should look like, not perfect, but real. Honest." And deep down, I hoped Evelyn would someday learn that too. But I didn't know then, not yet, that her decision to sell the house would lead to something even bigger. Because the past she thought she'd buried was about to come back in the most unexpected way. It was early morning when the call came. Daniel answered it in the kitchen while I was making tea, my hands absent-mindedly resting on my swollen belly. His tone changed within seconds, from calm to confused, then cold. When he hung up, he didn't move. He just stood there, phone in hand, staring at nothing. "Who was it?" I asked. He looked at me, eyes distant. "It was the bank. They said Mom didn't just sell her house. She transferred the deed to someone named Victor Hayes." I frowned. "Victor, your dad?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah. But he's been gone for 15 years. The kettle started to whistle, sharp and shrill, cutting through the silence. When Daniel was little, his father had walked out one night and never came back. Evelyn always said he'd left for another woman. Daniel grew up believing that, angry, abandoned, certain that his father had chosen someone else over them. Now, that story had cracks. We spent the afternoon searching through Evelyn's old documents, the ones she'd left behind when she moved out. Buried under stacks of unpaid bills and gambling receipts, we found a faded envelope addressed to VH in handwriting that didn't look like hers. Inside was a note. "I can't keep running from this. He knows about the money. I'll pay what I can, after the baby comes. Please, don't come here again." There was no date, no signature. But the envelope was postmarked 6 months ago. My breath caught. Daniel, she was still in contact with him. He looked at me, stunned. After all this time. We drove to the address on the deed transfer, a rundown mobile home park 2 towns over. The air was heavy with the smell of rain and diesel. When we knocked, a man in his late 50s opened the door. His eyes widened when he saw Daniel. "Danny," he whispered. It was like watching 2 ghosts meet in daylight. "Dad?" Daniel said, his voice cracking. I stood back, letting them stare at each other, the silence between them filled with all the years that had been stolen. We sat at a small kitchen table cluttered with old mail and coffee mugs. Victor looked older than his years, gray stubble, tired eyes, a heaviness that spoke of guilt. "I didn't leave because I wanted to," he said. "Your mother, she got in deep. Real deep. Gambling wasn't new. She owed some dangerous people back then too. I tried to fix it, took out a loan in my name. But when I couldn't pay, they came after me." Daniel clenched his fists. "So you ran?" "I ran so they wouldn't come after you. Or her. She told me you left for another woman." Victor's eyes filled. "She needed you to hate me, son. Otherwise, you'd have gone looking. And that would have gotten you hurt." The air felt thick with everything unspoken, betrayal layered on top of protection, love twisted into something unrecognizable. Then Victor looked at me. When I heard she'd sold the house, I knew she must have been desperate again. I told her I'd take it. That way, the men she owed couldn't seize it. I was going to sell it myself, pay her debt quietly. But she refused to let me help. Said she'd already ruined enough lives. He rubbed his temples. "I didn't even know she was pregnant again. When she told me about you, the baby, she broke down. She said she'd messed up one last time, but this time, she wanted to fix it. I swallowed hard. Evelyn hadn't been running from guilt alone. She'd been trying, in her own broken way, to protect us too. When we left that day, Daniel didn't say much. The drive home was quiet, except for the steady hum of the road. Finally, he said, "All these years, I hated him. And she let me." "She thought she was protecting you," I said softly. "Even if she did it the wrong way." He sighed, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't even know what to feel anymore." The next morning, Evelyn called, asking to meet. We met her at a park, quiet, empty, with benches glistening from the night's rain. When she saw Daniel, she froze. "I know, Mom," he said before she could speak. "I know about Dad." Her shoulders slumped. "He told you. Why didn't you?" Her eyes filled instantly. "Because you needed someone to blame. And I was already the villain in your eyes." "That's not fair," he said, voice trembling. "You let me believe he didn't care." "I couldn't tell you the truth," she cried. "If I did, you would have gone after him. And they would have gone after you." The wind picked up, scattering leaves around us. "You don't understand, Daniel. I've lived my whole life trying to fix what my weakness broke. I thought if I just kept lying, I could protect you from it all. But lies don't protect, they rot everything." For a long time, no one spoke. The air between mother and son was raw, jagged. Finally, Daniel whispered, "I can't hate you. But I don't know if I can trust you either." Evelyn nodded, tears streaming. "Then let me earn it back. One day at a time." I watched them, the man who'd carried her mistakes, and the woman who'd finally stopped running from them. For the first time in months, I felt something new settle inside me, not peace, not yet, but possibility. We went home that afternoon and opened the nursery door again. It was still half empty, but sunlight poured in through the window, landing gently on the wall where the baby's name still hung, Emma. Daniel touched the decal with his fingertips and smiled faintly. "Let's start over," he said. "For her." That night, I wrote a letter, not for Evelyn, but for Emma. "One day, you'll hear stories about the people who came before you, their mistakes, their pain, their love. I hope you learn that forgiveness doesn't erase what's been done, but it frees you to move forward." I sealed it and tucked it into a baby book beside her first ultrasound. Because in our family, stories had broken us once. Now, they could heal us too. But before that healing could take root, a final truth still waited, one that Evelyn hadn't told either of us. And it would change how I saw her forever. It had been 2 quiet weeks since the confrontation at the park. Evelyn hadn't called, and neither had Daniel. The silence felt heavy, not hostile, but cautious, like everyone was afraid that one wrong word might shatter the fragile truce we'd built. One rainy afternoon, I was folding baby clothes in the nursery, tiny socks, pastel onesies, soft blankets that still smelled faintly of detergent and new fabric, when I heard a knock at the door. It was Evelyn. She looked different. Not in the physical sense, still neat hair, still that faint scent of lavender perfume she always wore, but there was something quieter in her eyes now. Something humbled. "I didn't want to come unannounced," she said softly. "But I need to tell you both something before the baby comes." Daniel joined us in the living room, sitting stiffly on the couch. I sat beside him, one hand resting on my stomach. Evelyn didn't sit. She stood near the window, fingers clutching the strap of her purse, eyes darting between us. "I've been paying off my debt," she began. "Piece by piece. The furniture, the things I sold, they weren't enough. I thought I could win the rest back." Daniel flinched, his jaw tightening. "You gambled again?" She shook her head quickly. "No. I haven't stepped foot in a casino since that night you threw me out. I swear. But the money I owed wasn't just to loan sharks." My heart started to pound. "Then who?" She took a shaky breath. "Your father-in-law, Victor, wasn't just trying to help me out of pity. I owed him. He bailed me out years ago, and when I couldn't repay him, he used the house as collateral. That's why I signed it over. I didn't sell it for cash. I gave it up because I had no choice. Daniel's voice dropped. You mean you gave away your home to pay him? Evelyn nodded. He was the one who saved me from those people, Daniel. He didn't just disappear. He paid my debt, with everything he had. And when I finally got control of my life again, I promised I'd make it right. But I never did. She turned to me then, her voice trembling. When you told me you were pregnant, I panicked. I knew I couldn't face another generation with this shame. I thought if I sold the nursery furniture, I could pay the last of it, so none of this would touch your baby. But I only made it worse. Tears blurred my vision. All this time, I'd seen her as selfish, careless, greedy. But now, I saw something else, a woman crushed under the weight of her own mistakes, trying desperately to clean up a mess that had started long before I entered the picture. Daniel sat back, his voice low. Why didn't you just tell me, Mom? She looked at him helplessly. Because every time I look at you, I see everything I broke. I see the man who lost a father, a childhood, a home, all because I couldn't control myself. Silence filled the room. Outside, rain pattered softly against the window. Finally, Daniel spoke, his tone steady but weary. You can't undo what's done. But you can stop hiding. That's what I need from you, honesty, even when it hurts. Evelyn nodded slowly. I can do that. After that day, things changed, not suddenly, not neatly, but gently, like morning light creeping into a dark room. Evelyn started coming by again, not to meddle, not to apologize endlessly, but to help. She painted the nursery with me one weekend, humming softly as she brushed pale yellow over the walls. She even brought over a handmade mobile, delicate little wooden stars she said she carved herself. I can't give back what I sold, she whispered one afternoon, hanging the mobile above the crib. But I can give her something made with my own hands. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to correct her, to remind her of what she'd taken. Because, in some quiet way, she was already giving something back. Emma arrived 3 weeks early, just after sunrise. I remember the sterile hospital light, the rhythmic beeping of machines, Daniel's trembling hand holding mine, and that first sharp cry, so small, yet so powerful it filled the entire room. When they placed her on my chest, I felt everything at once, fear, love, exhaustion, awe. Later that afternoon, when Evelyn walked into the hospital room, she froze at the sight of her granddaughter. Her eyes filled instantly, and she covered her mouth, whispering, "She's perfect." I watched her, the woman who had nearly shattered our home, stand beside the crib and reach out with trembling fingers to touch the baby's tiny hand. Her tears fell silently. For the first time, I saw not just her guilt, but her love. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real. Over the next few months, Evelyn became a quiet, constant presence. She'd come over in the mornings to help while I rested, or bring soup on nights when Daniel worked late. She never overstepped, just did small, kind things, without words, without asking for forgiveness anymore. It wasn't dramatic redemption. It was quieter than that. It was consistency. Effort. And maybe that's what forgiveness really is, not erasing the past, but choosing to show up despite it. One evening, when Emma was about 6 months old, Evelyn brought me a small, sealed envelope. I wrote this a long time ago, she said. When I was at my worst. I never sent it. But it's yours now. After she left, I opened it. If you're reading this, it means I've failed again. I wanted to say I'm sorry, not for the lies, but for the fear behind them. I've spent my life afraid of losing love once people saw who I really was. I hurt you because I didn't believe I deserved better. But maybe my granddaughter will. Maybe she'll grow up in a home where love isn't a gamble, it's a promise kept, even when it's hard. By the time I finished reading, tears had blurred the ink. I didn't call her that night. I just walked into Emma's room, stood by her crib, and whispered, "You're safe." You'll always be safe. Because the cycle stopped with us. I thought that would be the end of our story, but a few weeks later, we'd learned something that would make me see Evelyn not just as the woman who broke our hearts, but the one who saved us too. It was a Sunday afternoon, calm and ordinary, the kind of day that made it easy to believe life had finally settled. Evelyn had gone to visit her sister in another town. Daniel was in the backyard, fixing the fence, while I sat by the window feeding Emma. The sunlight fell in golden streaks across her face, her tiny fingers clutching mine. Then my phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number. "Hello?" I said softly, trying not to wake Emma. "Mrs. Carter?" The voice was male, official, hesitant. "This is Officer Reynolds from the county department. I'm calling about Evelyn Carter." My heart froze. "What about her?" He paused, his tone gentler now. "She was found unresponsive in her sister's car about an hour ago. It appears to have been a heart attack." The world went silent. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, only the sound of Emma's faint cooing filled the space where my voice should have been. By the time Daniel came inside, I was still holding the phone, my eyes unfocused, tears silently falling. "Sweetheart," he said, alarmed. "What happened?" I whispered, barely audible, "It's your mom." And just like that, all the words we hadn't yet said, all the forgiveness we hadn't yet spoken aloud, vanished into the air between us. The funeral was small and simple, just as Evelyn would have wanted. A few neighbors came, some of her old bingo friends, and Victor stood quietly in the back, hat in hand. Daniel didn't cry that day. He just stared at her photograph, a black ribbon tied around the frame, his jaw clenched tight. It wasn't until we got home, when he walked into the nursery and saw the wooden mobile she'd made, that his body finally gave in. He sank to the floor, sobbing into his hands. "She was trying," he said. "She really was." I knelt beside him, wrapping my arms around his shoulders. "She knew," I whispered. "She knew you forgave her, even if you never said it." A week later, we received a letter from her attorney. Daniel opened it at the kitchen table, his fingers trembling. Inside was a legal document, and another handwritten note from Evelyn. He read it aloud slowly, voice breaking halfway through. "I left what little I had to Emma. It's not much, just a small savings account and the title to the car. But I also left something else with my lawyer, the deed to a small property I bought years ago under your father's name. It's not big, but it's debt-free now. I wanted to make sure your daughter never grows up without a place that's hers. A home where no one can sell or take away her peace. I may not have been the mother you deserved, Daniel. But maybe I can be the grandmother your daughter needs." Daniel pressed the paper to his face, tears staining the ink. "She did it," he whispered. "She really paid it off. Every cent." I touched the edge of the paper, feeling the weight of it, heavier than money, heavier than property. It was proof of something deeper, that redemption doesn't always look like apologies. Sometimes it looks like effort that no one sees until it's too late. A month later, we drove out to see the property Evelyn had mentioned. It wasn't much, a small cottage near the edge of a quiet lake, surrounded by tall trees. The shutters were old, the paint chipped, but the view, it was breathtaking. Daniel stood on the porch, taking it in. "She must have bought this years ago," he said softly. There was a small note taped to the inside of the front door, written in Evelyn's familiar cursive. "For my granddaughter. A home built from the pieces of all my mistakes. May she fill it only with love." I felt tears spill before I could stop them. Emma giggled in my arms, reaching toward the sunlight streaming through the window, innocent, untouched by all the pain that had come before her. In that moment, I realized what Evelyn had done. She hadn't just repaid her debt in money. She'd repaid it in love, the kind that outlives guilt, the kind that plants roots even after everything's been burned down. We decided to keep the cottage. Not as a permanent home, but as a place for Emma to grow up visiting, a reminder that even broken stories can have beautiful endings. Over time, Daniel and I began to talk about his mother more openly. Not as a villain or a victim, but as a woman, flawed, frightened, human. I told him one night, she didn't just lose control. She lost faith in herself. He nodded slowly. And we almost did too. Then he looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her crib. But maybe she gave it back to us, in her own way. I still think about Evelyn sometimes, especially when I'm sitting in Emma's room, watching the mobile spin slowly above her crib. The little wooden stars catch the light just right, casting tiny reflections across the walls, soft, shimmering, alive. I like to believe she's somewhere in those reflections, watching quietly, finally at peace. Because despite everything, the lies, the debt, the broken trust, she left behind something more powerful than regret. A legacy of learning. She taught me that love isn't just what we give when it's easy. It's what we keep giving when it costs us everything. Sometimes, the people who hurt us the most are the ones who loved us the hardest, they just didn't know how to show it. Evelyn's choices nearly broke our family, but in the end, they taught us something worth far more than any furniture, money, or house. That forgiveness isn't weakness. It's freedom. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you once trusted, tell me. Would you have found it in your heart to forgive them, even after everything? Because I did. And it changed my life forever.